So we are here to learn how to lay out our pattern pieces on our fabric so we're able to cut them out properly and make sure we can make our hoodie the way we want. Before we begin, the very first thing you need to do is to make a cutting list. So our sweatshirt pattern actually has two options. We have view A, which is a crew neck sweatshirt. So in this case, we're going to need a front piece and a back piece, both cut on the fold, two sleeves. They need to be mirrored from each other, so they're opposite. A neckband cut on the fold. Waistband we need to cut two, and cuffs we need to cut two. The front, the back, and the sleeve are all made out of sweatshirt fabric, and the neckband, waistband, and cuff are all made out of ribbing. The other option we have is the hoodie, view B, and like this, we have a front and a back and sleeves. So the front and the back are cut out of sweatshirt fabric, and they're cut on the fold. The sleeves, we still need two because we still have two arms. We need them mirrored, also cut out of the sweatshirt fabric. We need a hood. We need two pieces for it. A pocket, like a kangaroo pocket or a marsupial pocket. We have to cut one of those on the fold. And then we need two pieces of pocket interfacing, mirrored, of something called interfacing. But we'll worry about that later. The other option we have is we can mix and match elements from each hoodie. So if you want to do a crew neck, but you want the marsupial pocket, you are welcome to do that. Or if you want the hoodie, but you want ribbon cuffs and waistband, we can do that as well. So I'm going to be working in mini scale, and I have all my pattern pieces cut out and labeled. And then all the ribbing pieces. So that one's upside down. And I'm ready to go. So I'm going to show you how to lay all these out for both views. So I need to know how to lay out my fabric. So inside our instructions, we have a layout guide, which tells us what to do. And it tells us how to fold our fabric. So there's a couple things we need to know about before we can do that. So this is just a scrap of fleece. It's a little lighter weight than the one we're using. It's the same color on both sides, unlike ours, which has got the nice dark charcoal on one side and the lighter white on the inside. But the important part of this is this edge here that I want to show you. This is called the selvage edge. This is the factory finished edge, and it comes on all all pieces of fabric. I don't know if you can see how clearly you can see in this video, but there's little pinholes of where it was attached to either the knitting machine or the loom. So this is the same as ours on there. So we need to know. So there's one on either side of the width of the fabric. So this is just a scrap that only has one. The other thing we need to know about is ribbing. And ribbing, for the most part, generally comes in a tube, right? So you can see it's got a tube in a tube shape. So if it's knit on the tube, it's already folded in half. Okay, so now we need to learn how to interpret this pattern. So you'll notice that it's got two different views here. We've got view A, view B, and it says for all sizes on the view A, and this one says two different layouts. If you're making an extra small or a small, you use this first one, and if you're making a medium to extra large, you use the second one. There are two different ways of folding fabric that are shown on this. So those selvages I just shown, those are labeled, and the folds. So this one, where you do the front and the back piece, so front and back piece, it's called a double fold, or because the selvages fold into the center and there's a fold on either side because we need two pieces that are symmetrical. Once you're done that, you refold your fabric so the selvages line up on one side with only one fold, and you cut out your sleeve. And this allows you to cut out two sleeves at once and to ensure that they're mirror images of each other. The other thing you need to cut out for these is the ribbing, and this shows you how to fold your fabric to cut out the ribbing, but I'm going to show you a cheat for that. For view B, again, the start of it is exactly the same. You're going to do the double fold with your selvages into the center, and then you're going to recut it and refold it so that your sleeve, your hood, and your marsupial pocket can be cut out. Now this marsupial pocket needs to be cut on the fold. So this picture is not great because this number 8 should be right up against the edge. 7 doesn't need to be, that's the hood. And this is where your face will pop out, so we definitely don't want that cut on the fold. So I am going to use scrapbook paper to represent our fabric. So I am going to start with the double fold, and I'm going to make our layout look exactly the same as it did in the picture. So because I'm just using paper, I fold it in half first and then folded the outsides in. So I have my double fold. So if this was actually fabric, what I would need to do is I would need to measure each side of the fold. This one is 4.8 or 9, and this one is 4.8 or 9. So they're exactly the same on both sides. And once I've done that, I can start laying out my fabric. So I always put my pattern layout the exact way I have my fabric folded. So I'm going to begin with putting piece B over here. Sorry, piece B, piece 2, the back over here, and piece 1 over here. Now because this is cut on the fold, I'm actually going to line this right up on the fold. I don't want there to be any gap. On a hoodie, it's not that big of a deal, but on a shirt, that gap, so if I left a little gap like this, say that represents a ½ inch, when I open that up, that is a full inch. So that's the difference between somebody being able to see down your shirt and somebody not being able to see down your shirt. So because I can't pin properly on this mini scale, I'm actually just going to put in pins upright, and I always pin right along the fold to make sure it's exactly on that fold. And then I worry about pinning the outside down. And I'm going to do the same thing with piece 1. It's like science class and dissection, the T-pins. So I'm just going to do those 2 right now. So those are all pinned in place. So now I would cut all the way around and then take this part off. So I'm going to then cut this. So we're pretending this is fabric, and these are my fabric shears. I'm actually going to cut this fabric off once I've done that part. Oh, I knocked my pins right out of the foam board. And I'm going to refold my fabric. And this time, oops, I'm cutting upside down here. This time, I'm just going to fold it in half like this. Right, so I've got my selvages over here, and I have one single fold on that side. Now again, I'm going to make it look exactly like the layout. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to do it for view B, because for the view A, we just need the sleeves. So it's irrelevant really where we put that. But it does say that the sleeves are cut over here like this. I'm also going to need pattern piece number 7 near the fold but not on the fold for my hood. And then I'm going to have pocket piece number 8 here, so I can cut that out on the fold and have it open up like a marsupial pocket. Should. Okay, so I need to make sure that my hood and my sleeve are cut going with the grain of the fabric. I didn't have to worry about this here because these pieces are cut on the fold. And I made sure that my 2 halves are the exact same width apart. So in this case, though, I have to start, I have to do something to make sure that my pattern piece, the way I cut my pattern piece, is going along the lengthwise grain, which is the direction of the knit or the weave in the fabric. So I could try and look at the fabric and try and find one row or one column to follow. But it's really, really hard to do. So we're going to use this arrow that comes on these pattern pieces to represent our grain or the direction we want those yarns to run. So how I do this is I'm actually going to pin down one end. If it'll go in, one end, let's try this again. One end, there we go. And I'm going to take my handy dandy tape measure and I'm going to measure from this arrow to the selvage edges. I'm actually going to start at number 2 because this is a weird tape measure that has this big metal piece on the 1 and it's hard to be accurate. So I'm going to just do this on the 2 and I can see that it's going to 8.9-ish, 8.9. And then I'm going to slide this down to the other end of the arrow, make sure I'm on that line. And I'm going to make sure it's the same number. And it's not quite the same number, so I'm just going to adjust it a little bit until it is. And once it is the same number, I'm going to pin that in place. There we go. This one I'm going to pin on the fold because it needs to be cut on the fold. And the sleeve, I'm actually going to have to follow the grain line again. So I'm going to pin down one end. I'm going to take my tape measure and I'm going to start at that 2. If your tape measure is has the one line very visible, you can do that instead. And this one, it looks like it's, what do you think, 4.7? If I go down to this end on the 2 line, I'm not quite at 4.7, so I'm just going to actually adjust this until it is at 4.7, and I'm going to pin it down. Okay, now I'm doing this pretty quick here, so I'm not actually pinning all the way around the edge. I would normally pin down all of these pieces really, really well. I would ensure that all of the corners of the pieces are well secured because they have a tendency to flap while I'm cutting. The other thing I would do is I would ensure that I put a pin every hand width apart to make sure it's nice and secure. And when I'm pinning, just to remind you, you actually have to pin. I can't do it on this small scale, but I'll do demos in class if you need me to, that you want to go parallel to the cutting line. Just like this pin is, just inside of it. And that way it's nice and secure. You don't have to worry about trying to cut through your pins, because if I get upset that you're going to cut paper with your fabric shears, can you imagine how upset I'd be if you used it to cut metal? So we're going to pretend that this is all pinned down and ready to go as I unpin it. So what I've done in the interest of time is I have already cut out these pattern pieces. And I'm going to ask you to suspend disbelief for a moment and pretend that I haven't taken these off yet. Oh, that's not the right piece. There we go. That one goes on there. That I haven't taken these off yet, and that they're still attached to one another. So one of the things I want to draw your attention to is these little triangles. We've seen those before when we did our Tri-Tool lab, and they were, we just mark them or we just notch them out. These are notches and they allow us to line things up. So pretend this is still, suspend disbelief and pretend it's still attached. Before I unpin the tissue paper piece from the fabric, I'm actually going to clip all my notches. Now I know I just realized I messed up when drawing these on here. So pretend this is the back. And I didn't draw one on there. Okay, so notches, they line up with parts later. So on this one, you'll notice that was a double notch. And on the sleeve, there are double notches. So when I go to sew these together, I'll line those up, and that's how I know where the sleeve goes. The same will happen on the other side, and that's how everything starts to fit together. So it allows me to put everything back together. So we have to clip those before we move on. The other thing we're going to do at this point too is, where's my front? That's my back. Just lost the front. Anyways, on the front that I made here, you'll notice it's got this little line on it. And again, back to our marking days. I can't do it on here because I don't have the tools for it. But what that represents is where the pocket goes on there. So this would be your time to mark it. Now, normally we would mark only on the wrong side, but because the pocket's actually going to go on the right side, we need to mark it on the right side. So you're going to use your tracing wheel